Hey guys, you've come to the right place. This channel is all about exciting, entertaining, and engaging videos that will keep you hooked from start to finish. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on anything new.
I noticed the video script analysis referenced a moment where the character says something like, "Or you could just end it all." I want to flag that I'll be writing the new story without including that kind of suggestion directed at a character, even in a dramatic confrontation scene. It's an easy swap that keeps the emotional impact without that element. Here's the story. Some people will tell you that a good marriage is built on communication. I used to believe that. I used to believe that if two people loved each other enough, if they were honest enough, nothing could touch what they'd built together. I was 41 years old before I understood how completely wrong I was. Her name was Rebecca. We met during my second year of residency at Northwestern Memorial. I was exhausted in that particular way that only medical training can make you. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't leave no matter how much you sleep. She walked into the hospital cafeteria at 6 in the morning carrying a tote bag full of grant proposals she was editing for a nonprofit where she worked, and she sat down across from me at the only table with an open outlet, and she looked up and said, "You look terrible." I laughed so hard I almost knocked over my coffee. We talked for 40 minutes. I was late for rounds. She wasn't what I expected from the women I'd been introduced to through family or the occasional setup from colleagues. She wasn't performing anything. She had this straightforwardness that I found disarming. She said what she meant. She admitted when she didn't know something. She asked follow-up questions that told you she was actually listening. We dated for 2 years and got married on a Saturday in October at a small chapel outside of Evanston. Her father cried. Mine made a toast that went on too long. It was exactly what I wanted. We built the life together, the way you do. I finished residency, joined a cardiology practice, and we moved into a house in Wilmette that needed more work than either of us had budgeted for. She transitioned from the nonprofit into a fundraising consulting role, which gave her more flexibility and paid better. When her son was born, she took 6 months off and then went back part-time. When our daughter came along 4 years later, we found our rhythm. She handled the school pickups and the social calendar and the logistics of family life with an efficiency that I genuinely admired. I handled the finances and the home maintenance and made sure the cars were serviced. We didn't always have time for each other the way we wanted, but we had a life that felt real and solid in ours. I didn't see it changing. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I was inside it, and I didn't see it. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It was small, the way the first crack in a foundation always is. She started a new consulting engagement, a large architectural firm downtown. The kind of client that came with longer hours and more social obligations, client dinners, industry events, the occasional out-of-town trip. None of it was unusual for her work. I picked up the slack at home without being asked because that was what we did for each other. When my schedule was brutal, she covered everything. When hers was, I did. I thought we were still doing that. What I didn't register at first was the quality of her presence when she was home. She was there physically, but something had shifted. She'd sit at dinner and look past me, or she'd laugh at something our son said and the laugh would fade a second too quickly. When I reached for her hand on the couch, she didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. I told myself she was tired. I told myself it was the stress of the new client. I told myself 100 things, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at. The moment it became real, the moment I couldn't explain it away, was a Thursday evening in March. She had a dinner that night. Some industry mixer her client was hosting. I was home with the kids. Around 9:30, I found her phone on the kitchen counter, where she'd left it charging before she went out. It buzzed twice while I was standing there. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious, not consciously. I just glanced down the way anyone does. The name on the screen was one I recognized. He was a partner at the architectural firm. I'd heard her mention him in a professional context a few times, the kind of name that shows up when someone is describing their work week. But the preview of the message was not professional. It was 4 words, and they stopped me cold. I didn't go through the phone. I put it back down, and I walked into the garage, and I sat in my car for 20 minutes in the dark. When I came back inside, I finished the dishes and checked on the kids and went to bed. She came home around 11. I was awake, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. The next 3 weeks were the worst kind of waiting, the kind where you already know the answer, but you keep hoping you're wrong. I watched her. Not obsessively, not in the way she would have noticed, but I watched the way a doctor watches a patient when the labs are concerning, and you're waiting for the repeat draw. Looking for data. Building a picture. What I saw built a picture I didn't want. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I handled it with perfect composure. I didn't. There were nights I lay next to her and stared at the ceiling and felt a grief so physical it was hard to breathe. We'd been together for 14 years. She was my person. She was the person I had built my adult life around. The idea that she had made choices that erased all of that, I couldn't reconcile it. Not yet. What I could do was think. And I am, above all things, a methodical person. It's what medicine trained me to do. When you're emotional, you slow down, you gather information, you make a plan. I didn't make any decisions that month. I just gathered information. I hired an investigator through a referral from a colleague who had gone through a divorce 2 years before. I'm not proud of it, and I'm not embarrassed by it. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I could decide what to do next. What came back over the following 6 weeks was thorough, and it was worse than I had suspected. The man at the firm was not the only person. There was a second name I didn't recognize at all. The investigation documented patterns of behavior going back at least 8 months, possibly more. 8 months. Our daughter had started kindergarten 8 months ago. I had thrown her a birthday party 8 months ago. I had held my wife's hand at my father's retirement dinner 8 months ago, and introduced her to his colleagues as the person I was most proud of in my life. I went into the hospital the next morning and I performed 3 procedures without a single error, because that is what I do. On the drive home, I decided that I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to blow the family apart in a single dramatic confrontation. My children were 7 and 11. Whatever was happening between my wife and me, they did not need to witness their father's worst moments. They needed stability. They needed routine. They would have it. What I did instead was begin the long, quiet process of protecting myself and my children. The first call was to a family law attorney. I had heard from other physicians who had gone through divorces that preparation before filing matters enormously. Illinois is not a fault state in any practical financial sense, but documentation of infidelity can be relevant to certain custody and financial arguments, and I wanted to understand the full picture before I moved. My attorney was direct with me. Gather documentation, be patient, do not deviate from normal behavior, do not give her reason to become defensive or to move assets before you're ready. So that is what I did. I also had a conversation, long overdue, with the financial advisor I shared with a colleague. My wife and I had always combined finances without much formality. That was, I now understood, a significant oversight. Over the next several months, I quietly restructured what I could within legal bounds, separating investment accounts that were in my name alone, updating beneficiary designations, opening accounts at a different institution that I used exclusively. I was not hiding assets. I was organizing mine. She noticed the new car. I replaced my old one in June, which I'd been planning to do anyway, and she commented on it once, pleasantly, and I said simply that I'd gotten a good end-of-year deal. She didn't press. She was not paying close attention to me. I was paying close attention to everything. The strange thing about living inside a lie that the other person doesn't know, you know, is that it gives you a kind of terrible clarity. I saw our marriage as it actually was, not as I had been telling myself it was. I saw how far she had pulled back, not just in the last 8 months, but gradually, over years. I saw the moments when I had attributed distance to stress or exhaustion and what it actually was. I saw myself clearly, too, in ways I didn't like. I had let her carry more of the family logistics than was fair. I had prioritized my career in ways that created the silence she had eventually filled with someone else. I was not responsible for her choices, but I was not blameless in the marriage. None of that changed what I needed to do. In the fall, she brought up couples counseling. It surprised me, actually. I had not expected her to reach toward the marriage. I think she sensed that something had shifted in me even if she couldn't name it. I sat with her in the initial session, and I listened to her describe a distance between us, a lack of connection, a feeling that we had become roommates. The therapist asked me how I experienced our marriage. I said I felt like I had been alone in it for a while. She didn't understand what I meant by that. She thought I meant the logistics of family life. The session ended with homework assignments about dedicated time and communication, and I completed mine, and I watched her complete hers, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, just distance, the same distance I had been watching her maintain for months. I stopped the counseling after 3 sessions. I told the therapist privately that I had decided to move forward with a separation. She asked if my wife knew. I said not yet. I filed on a Monday in November. The process server reached her at work, which I had not planned deliberately, but which I also had not tried to prevent. I was told later that she came home that afternoon and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before coming inside. I was at the hospital. I had arranged for the kids to be at my sister's for the week. When I came home that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table. The filing was open in front of her. She had clearly been crying, but she had composed herself. She looked up when I came in and said, "Were you ever going to taunt to me?" I poured a glass of water and sat down across from her. I told her that I had found out in March. I told her briefly what I knew. I told her that I had spent 8 months deciding how to handle it in a way that protected our children, and that this was the conclusion I had reached. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I ended it. Both of them. Months ago." I told her I knew that. My investigator had noted the timing. She put her face in her hands. When she looked up, she said, "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose this family." And I looked at her, this woman I had loved for 14 years, the mother of my children, someone who was clearly in real pain. And I said, "I know. I believed that too. Until I understood you were willing to risk losing us every time you made those choices. The wanting isn't the part I'm questioning. It's the choices." I didn't yell. I didn't say anything cruel. I had rehearsed my cruelty in my own head for months, and when the moment came, I found I didn't want it. I just wanted it to be over. The divorce took 11 months. It was not clean. She retained an attorney who was aggressive, and there were periods where my anger came back hard and I had to work to keep it out of the process. But we both wanted to stay near the kids, which meant we both had incentive to reach a settlement rather than litigate everything. We ended up with shared custody, a property settlement I considered fair, and a co-parenting arrangement that has, over time, become functional. Not warm, not friendly, not always, but functional. The years after the divorce were not what I expected. I had assumed that once the legal process was over, I would feel something definitive, relief, or freedom, or closure of some kind. What I felt instead was a long, low grief that I hadn't fully anticipated. I was good at my work. I was present for my children. On paper, by every external measure, I was fine. But there was a weight to the evenings when the kids were at their mother's. A silence in the house that I hadn't made peace with. My son, who was 11 when we separated, understood more than I would have liked. He was careful with me in a way that teenagers are not supposed to be careful with their parents. And I noticed it. And I had a conversation with him when he was 13 that I think was the hardest conversation I have ever had in my life. I told him that what happened between his mother and me was not his story to carry. That the weight of adult failures belonged to the adults. He looked at me with his mother's eyes and said, "I know, Dad. I'm not carrying it. I'm just worried about you." I held it together until after he went to bed. My daughter took it differently. She was 7 and resilient in that way. Small children sometimes are, adaptable in ways that seem protective, but that you watch carefully because adaptation can mask things too. She settled into the two-household life with a matter-of-factness that I found both reassuring and heartbreaking. She kept a drawer at each house. She had a system. She was fine. She is fine. She's in college now, studying environmental science, and she calls me on Sundays. And when she calls, I sit down and give her the full hour. I did not date for 3 years. I told myself I was focused on the kids, which was true. I also told myself I wasn't ready, which was true for longer than 3 years, but not something I was willing to examine too closely. When I eventually did allow myself to be set up, by a colleague, reluctantly, at her persistent encouragement, I found that I had changed in ways I hadn't fully cataloged. I was more careful. I was slower to trust. I noticed things I had not noticed at 41. I noticed when someone was performing versus present. I noticed when someone deflected rather than answered. I was not paranoid. I was just paying attention finally. I am 54 now. I have a practice I'm proud of. My children are adults who seem, by most evidence, to be okay. Not despite everything, but alongside everything, the way people are okay. I have a quiet life that is mine, in a way my life before was not. I chose every part of it. The furniture, the neighborhood, the Saturday morning routine, the friendships I've invested in, and the ones I've let go. It's not the life I planned. I'm not sure anymore that the life I planned was actually what I wanted, or if I'd just been too busy to question it. She remarried 3 years ago. I heard through our son. She seems, from what I can tell at the distance we keep, to have found something stable. I genuinely hope that's true, not for her sake particularly, but because it would be good for my children of their mother as well. I don't think about her with anger anymore. The anger burned itself out a long time ago, in the way anger does when you stop feeding it. What's left is something more like acknowledgement. This happened, it shaped me. I am still here. There was a moment, about 2 years after the divorce was final, when I ran into her at a school function. The kids were in a winter concert. We were seated at opposite ends of the auditorium, and we both pretended not to see each other, the way you do. Afterward, in the lobby, we ended up standing near each other in the crowd, and she turned to me and said something about how well the kids had done, and I agreed. And there were 10 seconds of ordinary conversation that held the whole weight of 14 years. And then the kids found us and the moment was over. I drove home alone and I sat in the driveway for a while and I thought about all the ways it could have been different. Not better necessarily, just different. The version of events where I had noticed sooner, or where she had made different choices, or where I had been a different kind of partner. You can run those versions indefinitely. They don't go anywhere useful. Eventually you stop. The life I have is not what I imagined at 28, but it is honest, and it is mine. And some mornings, that is more than enough. I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong. Not just with Rebecca, not just with the marriage, but with the version of myself who didn't see it coming, or maybe didn't want to. Because there's a difference between being blindsided and being willfully unaware, and I was somewhere uncomfortable between the two for longer than I'd like to admit. What I know now is that the choices people make don't happen in a vacuum. Rebecca didn't wake up one morning and decide to burn down what we had built. It happened in increments, small accommodations, small silences, small moments where one of us chose comfort over honesty. I made those choices too, not the same ones, not with the same consequences, but I was not an innocent bystander in the gradual erosion of our marriage. I was a participant who stopped paying attention. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. It was easier, for a while, to be purely the wronged party, and I was wronged. That part is straightforwardly true. But if I stayed in that story and never looked past it, I would have just carried the same blind spots into whatever came next, and I had children watching me. I didn't have the luxury of becoming someone defined by bitterness. My son was already being careful around me at 13. That was the moment I understood that unexamined pain doesn't stay contained. It leaks out onto the people who had nothing to do with causing it. So I did the work. Slowly. Imperfectly. Over years. I looked honestly at the man I had been in that marriage. The one who worked long hours and told himself it was all for the family. The one who let his wife carry the invisible weight of social life and logistics and emotional maintenance while he optimized his career. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't absent in any dramatic way, but I was checked out in 100 small ways and I had called it stability. Turns out stability without presence is just a different kind of abandonment. None of that excuse is what she did. I want to be precise about that. The choices she made caused real damage to me, to our kids, to the years we spent in a marriage that had quietly become something other than what we both claimed it was. Consequences followed choices. They followed hers. That is not cruelty or revenge. It is simply how accountability works when you stop protecting someone from the results of their own decisions. What I came out of it with, eventually, was a clearer sense of what actually matters. Not the career benchmarks, not the house in the right neighborhood or the car that signals a certain kind of success. What matters is whether you're actually present in your own life. Whether the people you love can feel you there, not just see the evidence of your effort from a distance. I'm a better father now than I was when I was married. I'm a better friend. I'm more honest, less willing to let things go unaddressed because the conversation would be uncomfortable. I paid an enormous price to learn those things. I would not recommend the curriculum, but I am not willing to pretend the education didn't happen, or that the man who came out the other side isn't someone I respect more than the one who went in. That's what I have to show for it. And some days, that is enough.